So let's say you're a teenager and you'd like to have a better connection with your parents. Let's say your dad, for example. Say you're a teenage boy and you'd like to have a better connection with your dad. So you probably noticed that being a teenage boy and living in the home of your dad, where dad is kind of the boss and mom's kind of the boss too, they make the rules, they enforce the rules. Issues will come up where as you start to want to have more autonomy, there'll be some conflict, or there could be a lot of conflict. And that conflict can be direct and confrontational, or it could be subtle. So I'll give you an example from my experience with a teenage boy that I raised. I would say, hey, I'd like you to have your room nice and clean and neat, because I thought that was the way I was brought up. And he thought he should have his room the way he wanted it. And it wasn't neat and clean. In fact, it was kind of like the opposite. So this is part of the nature of conflict, two opposites coming together trying to find a medium ground. So as a teenager, you might establish a better connection from parent. It might be helpful to actually ask your dad, in this case, what is it he'd really like to have? What kind of behavior that would make, what kind of results that he would prefer to have that he's not having right now? And you know, it's good to start with a topic that's not really super critical or really gets angry after it. Start something easy and work your way up into the harder things. So let's say, where are the keys to presuming you're driving? It might be like, he might say, I can never find my keys. You don't put them on the rack, and I never know where they are. And we share a set of keys, or we share, or I don't know where the car's going to be back. I don't know when you're going to be back. Timing, scheduling, things like that, which are on the milder side of things that are easier to correct. So if the father said, so I don't know where you might say, you put stuff anywhere and I can't find it. You lose things. So the teenager, as a teenage boy, you can say, well, so let me see if I understand that. There's certain things that I use that after I use them, you have a problem because you can't find them. You don't know where they are. Did I get that right, Dad? And the father would probably notice that you heard what he said. And then his teenager says, is there more? What are the things? Is there more? And he'll go on and on. He'll say, well, and by the way, you don't clean up your room. I wish you to clean up your room. And you don't take the garbage out. You need to do your chores. And whatever his list of things are, to actually listen to them. And if you did something like write them down, that would probably blow him away, that you're actually listening and caring and making note of it. And trying to keep asking, is there more? Is there more? And if you could do that for 5 or 10 minutes, you might be really surprised that he gets close to the end. He may go deeper. He may go deeper for a while. He may get into things that are a little more painful or have more emotional energy around them. And I'm suggesting that initially you try to keep these light things that are, and work your way as your connection develops and as your skill set develops. But after you get all these things from him, you repeat it to him. Let me see if I got all these things. Boom, 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 boom. So you do a summary. So he's heard you, because you ask every time you ask him if you heard him correctly. You ask him to see if you got it exactly right, or there's a little bit difference. There's a little correction to be made. You make note of that. So you totally listen to him. You totally get him. And in doing this, by the way, you put aside all your judgments and values, and whether you think he's crazy or not, it's not relevant at this point. You're just listening, and you're like an observer. You're like the video camera in the ceiling that's recording this for posterity, to be historically accurate, right? So now, once you've done all that, and it's kind of the conversation's wound down, and you've got plenty of things on your list for this first dialogue, then you'd say, I could see why, it makes total sense to me, why you'd want to know where your keys are. It does. And it makes sense. In other words, you begin what they call a validation process. You first mirrored back so you really understood what he said, then you'd validate it. Validate it from his viewpoint. You don't have to agree with him. You don't have to agree with anything he said. But you validate it from his viewpoint. Like, I could see why, it makes sense to me, or I could see why you want to know where your keys are, because you need the car. It makes sense to me, you want to know when I'm going to come back, because you have dinner, or you have to use the car to go somewhere else. And it makes sense to me why you want the house to be neat, because that's how you like your house. So the validation is a second critical part. First part was to capture, observe authenticate, make sure you understood all these things that are on their issues. Second part is to validate from his viewpoint that it makes sense to you. Very important. The third part is called empathy. Now, being a teenage boy, it's kind of hard to know what it's like to be a parent. And so it's hard, it may be a little challenge to stretch to come up with empathy. I mean, if you could imagine yourself being a dad or imagine yourself having little brothers that took your car, took your stuff and then returned it, maybe you could relate to it. But what we're driving for on the empathy part is, I imagine that feels frustrating to you, to have somebody living under your house, under your roof, that puts stuff where you can't find it and does things that are with poor timing and loses things and breaks things. I imagine that feels frustrating to you. Now, I'm not going to go into more depth on this, but that's a simple 1, 2, 3. Now, in a dialogue where things keep developing, you actually do the reversal. And we're doing another little video clip on how a parent could be the listener to the teenage boy and do the reverse process. And the object of this, of course, is, so if you did it really well with your dad, he may be really motivated to do the same for you. And these two processes, when they're combined, become a key element in developing a stronger connection between the two of you. And the idea here, by the way, is that a lot of these problems get resolved when the connection is strong. One of the most dangerous things people do is talk to each other because they don't know how to have safe conversations. They don't know how to respect each other. They don't know how to listen. They don't know how to validate. They don't know how to empathize. And those are the key elements for developing a strong connection. And you'll find that as soon as you start listening to your parents, that connection gets stronger. They're going to have more respect. They're going to start speaking differently. And they're going to want to do the same for you. And that's the real power of this work.